Hello and welcome to another week of the Practical Permaculture Podcast. I'm your host, Alysse. I'm actually fresh out of the garden. My nails still have dirt under them. I have been planting out or trying to plant out my garlic. The goal is to get it in before Anzac Day, and that has not happened. I had them all ordered and ready, and I had all these grand plans of getting them in early because last year I got them in quite late, and now I think I remember why. It was the rain. So same things happened this year. It's rained and rained, and I was worried if I planted them that they'd rot in the ground, so I held off, and now the sun's shining, but I haven't prepped my beds. So lesson learnt again. Hopefully for next year I can prep my beds so that when the sun does shine I can just plonk them in the ground. So kind of scrambling, trying to get the beds ready. I've picked a sunnier spot this year. Last year I put them in a spot that got a lot of shade because we were new to our block and I didn't realize how much shade that area was going to get. So we're going to try this new spot this year, which won't be its forever home anyway, because that's where our driveway is going to end up. But for the time being, we're going to put it there and see how it goes. I'm going to soak them this year. I didn't soak them last year in a seaweed solution, so hopefully that will help as well. I didn't get a bad harvest last year, but I probably only got 60% of them that made it to the end. I think the dogs trampled on them a bit too, so lots of learnings from last season's planting. We also have some fruit trees that have arrived. So we've got a peach, we've got a Santa Rose plum. I can't remember the peach variety. We got a pear, and 2 more apples. So we'll have 5 apples in total. We'll plant all of those as well as our citrus and everything now that the weather's cooling down. So if you've got any tips for me for planting fruit trees, I know things like putting fish carcasses and things like that, amendments into the ground's really good for them. But I personally haven't done a lot of fruit tree planting. We kind of just stuck to veggie beds, raised veggie beds in our last property in the urban area. If you have any tips, we've got lots of potash and some homemade biochar that will probably mix through the soil. We'll have seaweed at our disposal. So yeah, if there's any tips, let me know. We're in heavy clay soil. Most of it's going in raised beds, like mounds anyway. So that's one consideration for our context when it comes to fruit tree planting or any planting really. This week I chat to Jodi Wilson. So she wrote a book, that's how she was on my radar, about simplicity. So she sold up with her family and they got a caravan. They travelled to Australia for a little while and they've ended up in Tasmania for a few different reasons, which she talks about. We talk about zone 00 and yourself and finding simplicity and paring life back and the impact that has financially, socially, mental health wise on how you live. So it's a really interesting discussion for anybody who is thinking about making changes or who does find the hustle and bustle of life just way too much, and technology and how that impacts your life. There's a lot of chat about motherhood. So if that's something that's in your life right now or in someone's life that you are close with, it's a really good chat about that as well, because she's written some postpartum books and some motherhood related books as well. So we do heavily focus on motherhood in this chat as well. And how that kind of plays into identity and, choices around how you live and all those kinds of things. It was really fun to talk to her. I actually didn't want to get off this call, but I had to pick the kids up from school. My alarm went off to remind me to pick them up, but I wish I had so much longer to talk to Jodi, and I'd love to get her back on again. She's releasing another book, which I think will be also very relevant to our listeners. And before I hit play on the recording, I just want to tell you about this season's sponsor. So the Botanical Bazaar are sponsoring the podcast for this season. The Botanical Bazaar is a gardening and sustainable living festival that is held in the Gold Coast Nerang. This year it's on the 2nd and 3rd of August. I will be there doing an Instagram takeover on the day to show everybody what it's all about. I would love for you to join me if you can. If you are interested in learning more or want to book your ticket right away, you can jump onto their website. The link is in the show notes. So here's our chat with Jodi Wilson. Welcome to the Practical Permaculture Podcast, your weekly dose of gardening, intentional living, and all things permaculture, served with a side of fun and plenty of great conversations. I'm your host, Alysse, and together we'll dig into practical tips, chat with experts, and explore ways to cultivate a more abundant, sustainable life. Let's get growing. Hello, Jodi.
Hi, Alysse.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good. So we've got you on this week from a permaculture perspective to talk more about Zone 00. So in permaculture, that's yourself and your immediate environment and what you can influence around you immediately. So your book, Practicing Simplicity, I read when it first came out, and it really resonated with me because in your book, you talk about going in a caravan, and that's the journey that I went on as well. So we kind of packed up and did the same thing. But for those who don't know you or haven't read your book, can you tell us a bit about who you are and your context and where you live?
Yeah, so I am a writer and author. I'm currently editing my fourth book, which will be out in January next year. And Practicing Simplicity was my first book, and that came out in 2022. So it's been a really busy few years of writing. And I've got 4 children. So my eldest is 18 this year, and my youngest will turn 8. And yeah, we in 2017, when my youngest kind of was just born, we decided after kind of feeling quite unsettled and I suppose quite angry at the pace of life that we'd found ourselves caught up in, which so many people do, without really realizing it, and also without, I suppose, understanding that there is another way. We decided to spend our very hard-earned and long-saved house deposit on a caravan and a 4-wheel drive, having never caravanned or camped before. And it was totally left of field for someone like me who loves predictability and always likes to know what's coming next. But I just felt, very deep part of myself that it was the right path for us. And yeah, there was just that very strong sense of knowing that it was what we should be doing. And I'm so glad I followed that intuition because it was turned out to be the best decision we've ever made and kind of changed how we live now. So we kind of left the caravan on our caravan trip, the Central Coast of New South Wales, and now we live in a small town in Tasmania. And we've been in our house now for just over 3 years.
Wow. I didn't realize your eldest was that old already because I see the pictures on your blog and on your social media, and in my head there's still these little people.
Yeah, I've actually stopped sharing kind of current photos of them, and I really don't share many photos of them now at all. But no, like I fell pregnant when I was quite young, at 22, and it was a big surprise, but I love being a mum, and my most recent book, which is out in July, is all about early motherhood. It's called The Complete Guide to Postpartum, and it's a mother-focused companion for life after birth. And it was a massive undertaking because there is very little healthcare for that stage of a mother's life, and that is when a mother is her most psychologically and physiologically vulnerable. And so there's very little healthcare because the attention shifts immediately to the baby, and we can see the repercussions of that in our really, really increasing mental health rates, postnatal depletion. There's just a string of it's just a really hard time to be a mother. And I interviewed over 60 perinatal health specialists for the book from all around the world, and they agreed it's never been harder to be a mother. And I think it's because those expectations of being the perfect mother are rife and they're very deep-seated. And alongside that, we have dwindling health and social support and in a cost of living and housing crisis as well. So It's really tricky, and I must admit that at the beginning I found it very hard to write a hopeful book, and I wanted to write a practical, kind, gentle, evidence-based book and thread a lot of hope into it. And I did find that hope eventually through the research and through the language that there's a lot of new language around early motherhood, which is really bolstering. But it's challenging. And I think if I compare the experience for mothers now to when I had my first baby, so, we didn't have hardly any money, but we had Kevin Rudd's baby bonus, which economically was kind of life-changing, and our rent was $210 a week for a 3-bedroom home, and we could easily afford to live on one income. So I'm writing this book for mothers now, and while I was doing it, I mean, when you write a book about a particular life experience, of course you reflect on your own. And so I was thinking back to what it was like for me as a really young mum. It's just so obvious to me that if that was me now, the 22-year-old me now having a baby, it would be an entirely different experience because I had that economic cushioning and we could afford to live so much easier on so much less. And so,
it's interesting, or your books, it's a reflection of our modern day society that we're living in, both your motherhood books and your Practicing Simplicity. It has that thread of, lack of community and lack of support and the busyness and, getting caught up in all these, want for more as well, and also just cost of living and these kind of pressures that we have that impact the way that we live day to day.
Yeah, and they're really real pressures. And I think when you start to consider how to hop off the conveyor belt and step to the side, I like that analogy of just stepping to the side for a bit and kind of being able to observe what everyone else is doing, and then really considering what matters to you and what your priorities are. It's really easy when you do that to feel like you're on the outer. But there's so many people living like this, and it's not always easy because there is always the work of life. But when I was writing the postpartum book, the busyness and the cost and the overwhelm, that they're all kind of accumulating to affect, when a mother goes back to work, or back to paid work, I should say. Important to delineate that motherhood is work. And some mothers choose to return to work soon after having their baby. And I think we need to make space for all experiences here, but also for those mothers that want nothing more than to stay at home with their baby and they have to return to work because of cost of living. That decision, or that necessity, is actually dictating how they approach infant feeding and sleep. And so for those crucial, precious early months, the cost of living is affecting that as well. And it's making it very, very difficult for new mothers. So,
and how that encroaches on your values as well, that pressure, because I was the same. I wanted to stay home, and we just couldn't afford to, and I went back, and that ended up in me having a big mental health event. But because my little one was only 6 months old at the time, everyone kept saying, oh, it's baby blues, it'll pass. And it got to the point where I was so run down and having anxiety attacks where I just couldn't function anymore. But it was interesting that nobody really reached out, because it was just kind of blamed on the baby, and you'll get over it and you'll move past it and you just need to adjust. It's interesting.
And I think, have you heard of the term matrescence?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just another biological stage in life. But when mothers really understand it and understand how their brain has rewired in pregnancy to prepare for parenthood, and see it, consider the identity shifts as well. I think socially and culturally we can create a lot more space for mothers to have those doubts and fears about who they are now. And that identity shift is massive. And I remember it really strongly, that profound sense of being really untethered. not knowing. Yeah. And it's that not knowing, again, which is a part of practicing simplicity as well, that is perhaps the one constant in life, that uncertainty. And I think the world's uncertainty as a whole has perhaps never before encroached on us like it is now. I think we're all feeling it, and it's really, really challenging to kind of stay in our space and really stick to our priorities and our values, and to move forward confidently, especially when we don't have those support structures. And early motherhood is, such a vulnerable time, and the support structures aren't there. And you kind of have to create them for yourself.
You mentioned postnatal depletion. I read the book Postnatal Depletion Cure. His name eludes me now.
Oscar Serralak.
Thank you. And I found that really helpful, because it's kind of, once I got my nutrition and supplements and those things sorted, it made everything else a little bit easier too. And it's such a holistic picture, and I think people can look at it as just this one little segment, but there's so many factors that come into it, and so it's very multifaceted as well, what you put into your body and how you treat yourself and your social and financial, it's this whole thing, and you've got to get it all kind of working well for it to kind of even start getting a bit of traction.
Yeah, and postnatal depletion isn't kind of medically recognised as well.
No.
So it's more of an umbrella term. And I think that's where it can get really vague. And, there's so many issues that stem from that, and we probably don't have even time to consider it today. But again, it's an accessibility issue, in that you have to have the money to be able to go to the GP that is going to agree to run the bloods, to, look at all this stuff, and then you need to go to someone that will give you the right vitamins and minerals. And I'm actually working with a not-for-profit here in northwest Tasmania, which is the first of its kind in Australia, and it's about to launch their pilot program. It's called First Foods, and it means that every mother that births in Tasmania, this is the plan over the next 3 years, will receive a week's worth of nutrient-dense homemade food, because there is a really strong link between maternal nutrition and milk supply, and mental wellness, and I suppose that acknowledgement of the profound importance of postpartum as a season that really can and does dictate health and well-being for decades to come. So
that's amazing.
It's really amazing, and I can't believe it's happening in this little part of the world. But there's two beautiful, strong, passionate women behind it, and they've got the funding to do it. So it's
so cool.
It's so cool. It's very tangible social care, and we definitely need more of it.
And I think motherhood and permaculture are really interesting, because people, when you become a mother, you start reevaluating your beliefs a little bit. It shakes up what you really think about the world, and you have to think about, how do I want to raise this little human, and what do I believe in? And so a lot of people come to permaculture because I want to change the way I eat, or they go down a low tox journey, and then they kind of go down that rabbit hole, and they find all these things that might be adjacent to permaculture principles. So I think they really intersect, because mothers are in that reinvention phase and rethinking phase and growth phase of their life.
And the creative phase as well.
Yes.
Even though there's not a lot of time to create. And I think that's where the challenge is. It's like you have all these ideas and you want to make all this change, and then all of a sudden you're in this golden haze of early motherhood, which is very purposeful, and that is that your baby holds all of your attention in the present moment. So if there's ever a time that you're going to be incredibly mindful in life, it's in early motherhood, because you can't look too far ahead. There's no point. You don't know what's going to happen in the next hour, and babies have a beautiful power to hold us there. But that doesn't mean that it's easy. If you've got a brain that really wants to create, or you've come from a professional career where you're really used to clear boundaries and clear goals, and you've ticked those lists every week. So that can be really challenging, and that total unpacking of who you are, and that profound letting go of who you were.
Yes.
And the grief in that, there's immense grief when you realize that there actually is no going back. Even though we hear about bounce back culture, it's actually, I mean, bounce back means to recover from a setback quickly. And it's biologically impossible. Like, you would never say to a teenager, bounce back to childhood, because we know that's biologically impossible, and it's the same when you become a mother. And I think, that grief of letting go of who you were, and the grief of a changed body, and the grief of what we now know, a changed brain in a very profound ways. The brain rewires itself to prepare for motherhood, and that's incredibly comforting and encouraging when you know that as a new mother, because you definitely feel those changes. And it can also be incredibly confronting to know that you're changed at such a deep level.
Yeah. And for anybody who's like into this motherhood chat, you have a Substack called Dear You Mum.
I do have a Substack called Dear New Mum, and because I'm the established mum now, and I feel like it's my responsibility to send a letter every week to a new mother and say, well, reassurance is what all new mothers need. They don't necessarily need advice off any of us. Reassurance is, I suppose, an emotional life jacket. And all new mothers need that. They just need to know that they're doing well, and they're not supposed to have all the answers, because early motherhood is just this profound season of learning. And that's the part we keep skipping over. And I think that's where the hope is, really. If a new mother can know that maternal instinct has been debunked with all this research about the maternal brain, in that so many of us become mothers and think that a switch goes on, and that we're supposed to know what to do and know how to read our baby and have all the answers. And that's just not true. Instead, the brain is primed to learn. So we're learning thousands of new things a day about who our baby is and who we are as a mother and how we connect and relate to each other. And that is lifelong, that relationship. But for a new mother to hear that she's not supposed to have all the answers and that she's just learning. And if we look at any other learning experience in life, permaculture, even gardening, school, anything, it requires time, and it requires questioning and observation and patience and perseverance. And they're all the things that you go through every day in new motherhood. And so, when I spoke earlier about, at the start of the book, not knowing if I could write a hopeful book, I found hope in that very simple but often skipped over fact that motherhood is all about learning, and we're constantly learning and evolving in response to our child, and we kind of do that in circles. And the woman that Dr. Aurelie Athan from Columbia State University in New York was the one that really revived the term matrescence. And she's heading up that field of research alongside reproductive identity. And she was saying that, does matrescence ever really end? And that's, I think that's, I don't think it does, because no matter how old your child is, you're still connected to them emotionally in a way that means that as they're growing up into adulthood, you're growing yourself into a deeper version of mother.
And the roles change as your child grows.
Yeah, of course they do. And it was really interesting for me to be writing this book and also be guiding my eldest into adulthood. And it was, it really kind of became quite an emotional writing experience for me to be reflecting on the very beginning of that journey while living essentially one chapter closing of that journey.
Yeah. And you still have such a big gap between your kids to straddle an 18-year-old and an 8-year-old and what that involves.
Yeah, it's always changing, and you're always learning, and I suppose it's been really interesting to me because my 4 children are very different as well. And what works for one in terms of language that really kind of resonates with them does not work with the other. And it's mostly just a really humbling journey. And I think we're all trying to do our best, but I also think we're in a world where there's just information overload, and we're overwhelmed by it. We are so overwhelmed by what we should be doing and what we must be doing. And that's dangerous for a lot of reasons. And I won't go too far into it, but we know that shame. So we hear a lot about mother guilt, but we often don't hear about shame. And shame is when a mother is thinking, I should be doing this, I'm not doing well enough. And that means that she's less likely to kind of speak up about her concerns. And it's one of those it's one of the root causes of perinatal suicide, which is one of the leading causes of death the year after birth. So when we have all these high expectations that are kind of peddled on social media about what a good mother is and what a perfect mother is, it is dangerous. It's really dangerous, and it's a sad reality, and I think anyone working in the perinatal mental health space knows that. Yeah.
I was listening to a conversation on a podcast the other day about the difference between feeling mum guilt and mum shame, and that guilt is a good thing. Guilt is because it's not aligned with your values necessarily, and so you feel guilt. You snap at somebody in line when you're getting your coffee and you feel bad. You feel guilt because that doesn't align with what your expectations of your behavior is and what your values are. Whereas shame is that external pressure and that idea of what you should be like, or like what you're saying, a good mother or a good gardener or a good, whatever provider. And like you said, the difference between those two things is that we should actually be renaming all this motherhood shame, because it is mostly external and all these things that are pushed on us rather than what we actually believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's helpful to remember that society benefits immensely from mothers who are striving to be perfect. Like the unpaid caring industry is worth 650 billion annually. That's 3 mining sectors. So when we're striving to do really, really well as mothers, the whole of society is benefiting. And we're kind of depleted and burnt out as a result. Parental burnout is on the rise. It starts from birth, unfortunately, when in kind of the medical model, there is this thing as a postpartum cliff. So as soon as you birth your baby, you're going to fall, whether you have private or public health care, you're going to fall off that cliff because there is no public health services to catch you. That is slowly changing. There's more funds in the federal budget for maternity care, but we've still got such a long way to go in terms of accessible and affordable lactation support, pelvic floor awareness and support as well. There's a lot of issues, but as I said, there's also a lot of hope. And one part of that hope is having conversations like this that are making their way into mainstream, and having social conversations about what mothers need and what new fathers and new parents need in that vulnerable time. And it's not so much teddy bears and an abundance of onesies. It's kind of food on the doorstep. It's messages to check in. It's if you've been invited to, it's going in and doing the dishes and the laundry and changing the bed sheets, taking older siblings out, recognizing the vulnerability of that season and how crucial it is to support new parents right up from, as long as you can, really, because a mother is more likely to be diagnosed with postnatal depression at 12 months after birth than she is at any other time.
Yeah. And so for anybody who does want to start slowing down or observing their life and sidestepping that treadmill, where do you think is a good place to start?
Start where you are with what you have. I think that's a really good place to start. So what can you do right now to change things? And I think it's not a quick fix.
Yeah.
You know, and we're used to quick fixes and we like to be given lists. But lists are pretty overwhelming as well. And so I know I say, it's ironic that I say this and like we totally upended our life by, we're going to sell 80% of what we owned and travel Australia in a caravan for a few years. But I think now about how I make change, and it is paying attention. And we live in an attention economy where most of us are very distracted. And so it's really honing your attention and asking yourself, what matters to me? I discuss that a lot in my Substack newsletter, Practicing Simplicity. And I think a lot of people resonate with that it's not about making really big change. It's about the small stuff, really.
Yeah.
And for me, it's been an interesting time for me actually, because I left my primary source of income, and with that comes, I'm a freelance writer, so I've been here before in this season of frugality, which is a choice and also a necessity at the moment. And I think when you really strip back the distracting excess, you really kind of get to the crux of what matters to you in life. It's that simple stuff. I've just had the most abundant garden all summer, and the joy of it is profound. And it's joy not only when I'm in the garden, but when I'm walking through the fruit and veg store, and I'm like, well, I don't need to buy cucumbers or zucchinis or herbs or tomatoes because they're all growing in the garden. And I was reading today about savouring those positive experiences and how it's one pillar of happiness. And I think when you do kind of rid your life of too many distractions, that's when you really start to have the space to savour what is already really good in your life. And it's really ordinary, normal stuff. One thing I've done for the past 6 months is I've walked without my phone. So when I walk my dog every day, I walk without my phone and without headphones, because I was finding that a walk was becoming an opportunity just to learn more. And that's fine. And some neurotypes really need that when they're walking. But what I realised is that I was filling up space where I could just let my mind wander. And I found that as a writer, that was it was wasted time, when I could just be walking and let all those thoughts untangle and kind of get to the crux of what I was trying to work on at the time. So it became a really important part of my writing to actually just walk without headphones. And now I don't have my phone in my bedroom either.
So nice.
That's been another big one, and I've noticed a big difference in how settled my sleep is. So I just leave it in the kitchen. And I think we really have to, in this age of excess and distraction, we really need to create really firm boundaries about, like, if we really intentionally want to have more time and space in our life and to simplify, we kind of need boundaries around those things that we know is going to distract us, which is our phones for most of us.
I don't know if it was in one of your Substacks or in your book, but you wrote about standing and making porridge in the morning and using that time as a ritual to be grateful and have gratitude. And so what role do everyday things and also rituals play in your pursuit of living a more simple life?
It sounds really idealistic, doesn't it? And I don't think any of us are like stirring porridge every single morning of our life and just like basking in gratitude. But I think it's just, for me at the moment, it's actually noticing the micro seasons of where I live. So one of the reasons I love living in Tasmania is because we've got really distinct seasons here. And the Palawa people, Indigenous to Lutruwita in Tasmania, believe we actually have 3 seasons, not like the European 4 seasons.
Oh, that's interesting. Up here it's 6.
Okay, yeah. So I actually completely agree with it. But there's also so many micro seasons within those seasons. And walking every day just to really notice those subtle differences is so it's bolstering, really.
Yeah.
And when you notice those changes in this, that are happening outside the window and, you know, on your daily walk, you just kind of feel like you understand where you live a little bit better, and I think therefore you understand yourself a little bit better and how you're responding to those seasons. So I think when you refer to stirring the porridge, it's actually about cultivating awareness and self-awareness.
Yes.
And you can do that with a cup of tea. Like, one of my favorite things is to sip a cup of tea and stare out the window, looking, just staring. And we don't really, I mean, that looks like nothing, and nothing is definitely not something that is respected or revered in our productivity culture. But it's so beneficial for the brain and for mental health, and, you know, just to sit and stare. Like, how lovely is that?
Totally. We have a little ritual in the morning where we have coffee in the morning. My husband and I, the kids know it's not time to ask questions or bother us. They can go eat their breakfast, and we have no phones, and we sit on the deck under our gum trees, and that's our little morning ritual. And sometimes we talk and sometimes we don't, and sometimes it's just, you know, watching the birds and things. And it's a nice little ritual that we've intentionally made space for in our day that really is a good pause before the day starts, and to just kind of be in the moment a bit more.
Yeah. And I think, you know, people really do think that simplicity and slowing down is about upending their life and carving out great swathes of time to do all these big things, but it's actually really about those tiny little moments that are already peppered throughout your day. And I won't go too much into it because it's exactly what my new book is about, which comes out in January next year. So I'm actually editing it at the moment. But I think that's the part that we're skipping over, is that there's all these little moments throughout our day where we can intentionally just sit in them and take a breather. But we don't, because we're too busy thinking about what has to happen next.
Yeah. And what about the idea of keeping up with the Joneses? Because you have a 5 ways to practice simplicity post, and you wrote that you suggested that eggs on toast might be the perfect midweek dinner. But then you had lots of people messaging you saying, you know, what do you mean eggs on toast? And this revolutionary idea of just having eggs on toast and not having expectations, or having a MasterChef meal, or a, you know, thing that you've seen on Recipe Tin that you need to cook for dinner.
Recipe Tin is very good, I must admit.
Yes, I love it.
But that was, so every Sunday on Instagram I share 5 ways to practice simplicity, and they're just really gentle, accessible suggestions. So a few weeks ago I mentioned have eggs for dinner. Like, it's a great midweek meal. It's thrifty, it's easy. Like, choose the easy option when life feels really pressing. And just quite alarmed at how many people were like, this is a great idea. Why didn't I be like, oh my gosh, like, this is great. And I'm just like, we have become so accustomed to chasing the icing on the cake every day that we are totally skipping over the good in the really simple, normal stuff. And that's, I mean, I have to remind myself of that all the time. Like, I'm not here saying that, like, I'm constantly in, you know, sitting in gratitude for, like, my lovely cup of tea and my bookshelf. And it's that I do this, I talk about this stuff because I need to hear it too. But totally, like, and I'm a big fan of also, like, filling your freezer with a week's worth of meals, so that when life is really busy, or when you're just exhausted, or when you're sick, you've really taken care of yourself in a really tangible, you've taken care of your future self in a very tangible way. And it's so like, this is the stuff that really is comforting to all of us, to know that I've got 7 nights of meals in the freezer that just need to be reheated. It's just like, oh, like I've created that space for myself for those nights when I'm exhausted, or it's the first day of my period, or like we're sick, or I just can't be bothered.
Or like deadlines, like even with work, we do the same thing so that we know if we have to have a really full day at work, we don't have to compromise on what we're going to eat for dinner. Or, I mean, yes, toasted sandwiches are nice, but when you're having them 7 nights a week, so we've got things like moussaka in the freezer and, some veggie meals in there and curries and stuff like that we always know that if we want it, we can just pull it out quickly and chuck it in the oven or defrost it. So it's so handy.
Yeah, it's really handy. And I think in a cost of living crisis as well, it's if you can afford to kind of buy in bulk, which in the long run is cheaper, and then cook for the freezer as well as for one night. It's a practical way of doing things as well.
Mm-hmm. And so how did you find the adjustment? We kind of talked a bit about it before we hit record, but you say people talk to you about when you get back from your caravan trip, or we have put these things to slow down and simplify our life. How do we not get back on that hamster wheel of trying to chase the biggest, best thing or the next thing and get caught up in that, social media land or being on our phones and connected all the time? Do you have any advice around that?
We live on an island in Tasmania, and so there is kind of a slower pace of life here, which was one of the reasons that we chose to settle here. But in saying that, I've just written 4 books in 4 years, so it's been slow. So it's interesting because my work life hasn't been slow, but I can shut down the laptop and walk outside and I feel that slowness immediately.
Yes.
And I think for me, the past year or 18 months has really been about understanding that I can be a creative, productive human, but that in order to do that, I need to really prioritize rest and downtime and that space. And being very clear around boundaries. So like I only really post to Instagram once a week. I might post a few stories, but I'm well aware of the hold that has on my brain, and also the feeling that I'm left with afterwards, which is just kind of like a mental fog and exhaustion. There's a phrase called, I think it's digitally skip, which is where you're kind of chasing that dopamine hit by going between laptop and phone and tab to tab. And I think that's what we've become accustomed to because we're just chasing that dopamine hit. So that's been really good for me to kind of like compartmentalize that. But in terms of filling up life, it's interesting to go back to motherhood and to really understand, like a friend of mine told me this, that the really early years are very physical. Like you're putting kids in and out of car seats and you're wiping bottoms and you're feeding and you're carrying and you're soothing. And then kind of in primary school, it's the busy years where you're like driving them places. And I've always said I'm not going to become a taxi service, but these things happen. Like
you have 4 children.
I've got 4 children. I've also got a bus stop at the end of my street, which is very handy. And then in the teenage years, it's all emotional. So, it's almost like you're awake at 10 p.m, not soothing a baby, but soothing troubled conversations, And that's been really interesting in terms of our days and how they've shifted with the ages of our children. But for me personally, I just know what I need to live well. And that's a question that I feel like came up a lot on our caravan trip. Like we can live so well with so little. So what then do we need to live well in normal life? And I feel like I'm always asking that question, like what do I need? And for me, like I need exercise. It's really good for my brain. It's really good for my body. One coffee a day is enough for me. Yeah.
We're all guilty of that, aren't we?
Yeah. More protein in my meals, which I don't want to harp on about the protein, but, all the specialists talking about perimenopause are actually right. It does make a big difference. And also just understanding what my brain needs to continue to be creative. So if I'm consistently writing, and that's what I love Substack for, it's more long form, considered writing as opposed to grabby content on Instagram. And I think it's just been essentially Substack is my job now. Aside from writing books, it's my job. So I've carved out a very kind of consistent income from it, which is amazing for a writer. I think Australians have been quite slow to move over to it, and generally speaking, my friend Bree Lee wrote about this recently, that Australians are quite hesitant of a paywall. So we're used to kind of free access to everything, but there's been a big shift over to it this year. I've seen so many more Australian creators writing there, and it's a fantastic platform. But yeah, just being really aware of what I need. So yeah, I need downtime. I need a lot of time to read books. So if I'm going to write well, I need to read widely, and that's a priority for me. And just even when I really don't want to, it's true what they say about walking and moving my body intuitively. So sometimes I'll walk really quickly, and sometimes I'll jog, and sometimes I'll just stroll, depending on how I feel. But yeah, essentially we live quite a small life here. A lot of people would look at it and go, that's just way too quiet for me. We hardly go out for dinner. I'm celiac, so it's a little bit tricky for me to go out for dinner. But there's also not a whole heap of options here, and we kind of are living frugally, so we do just cook at home. It is a small life, but I love it, and I wouldn't want it any other way. And when I do feel like my brain is just exhausted and I've gone too far, then I just know what I need to pull back, and that's often in very basic forms of comfort. And I learnt more about hormones when I was writing the postpartum book, but you know how everyone's talking about cortisol, the stress hormone, as being so detrimental to our health and our longevity, and the science is there to prove it. But the opposite of cortisol is oxytocin. So it's that love hormone, it's the cuddle chemical, but it's also it's kind of that gooey sense of ease, that everything's going to be okay. And we feel it when we're cuddling someone we love, when we're tucking our children into bed at night, when we're drinking a warm drink, when we're eating kind of nostalgic, nourishing food like chicken soup, when we're cuddled up on the couch under a blanket watching a funny movie, when we're reading a really good book. It's all those things that I think we really need to lean into when we are exhausted and burnt out and frazzled by normal life, because they're the things that really we know oxytocin is a healing hormone. And so if you do want to heal yourself, lean into all those beautiful, comforting things like hugging a hot water bottle or getting cozy on the couch, and know that it's actually profoundly good for your physical and emotional well-being.
Yeah, I love that. And do you think as a society, I think especially people my age in their 30s and 40s, like the millennial generation, do you think we need to as well maybe reassess what we need, and how much we actually have and how unnecessary it really is?
Yeah, it's just the profound abundance of our life is so detrimental. And I think social media has really taken that to the next level, because, I can scroll social media for 10 minutes and be sold so many things and so many unnecessary things. And that was a conscious choice for me years ago to stop working with brands to promote products, which was not an easy decision to make because I was making money from it, but it didn't feel like I could talk about simplicity with any integrity if every time someone came to my page, they were tempted to buy something that they didn't really need. And I am so glad I made that decision then. But I also, it's tricky, isn't it? And I thought about it a lot when writing the postpartum book, because I was thinking about all those young, impressionable mothers who in the middle of the night are on their phones and perhaps feeling a lot less than because they don't have XYZ for them or their babies, and they can't afford to go on a holiday. And I think we need to come to the discussion with a lot of compassion. And it's, it's not as simple as kind of good, bad. We all need to buy stuff, don't we? But I think approaching the whole idea of abundance with kind of, I suppose, a thrifty lens. So the word thrift comes from the word thrive. So when we are thrifty with our choices, we're kind of contributing to our vitality, essentially. And no one wants to feel like they're overwhelmed with stuff. Like, it's not a nice feeling. And the more stuff that you accrue, the more you have to look after it. And also, the more stuff you buy, the longer you've had to work to pay for it. And that was what was really pertinent to me on the caravan trip, was that we stopped buying stuff because we didn't have anywhere to store it.
Space.
And I realised that I'd spent so much of my life working to buy stuff that I really didn't need. And there's incredible power in that, I think, when you really start to look at it. But it's not always easy. Like, of course, I look at things and think, gosh, I really wish I could afford that right now. But the fact of the matter is, I've got 4 children and my grocery bill is about $600 a week. And we've got a mortgage, a small one. Again, really grateful to have been led here, and that was one of the reasons we did arrive here. I wrote a recent ABC article about it. Like, we're a long way from family, but we knew that we didn't want to overextend ourselves with a mortgage because it wouldn't allow me to live day to day with any space in my life.
We're the same. That's why we ended up here, because we both didn't want to work full time. We just wanted to spend more time with the kids after having so much time. And everyone says, oh, they're only little once and you'll never get that time back. So we made the most of it in the van. But then coming back, it was like, well, how does this translate into everyday life? Because now we need to live somewhere. We can't afford to live where we lived before. So, we ended up, our mortgage is still large for us. Like, it's around that $600K mark, but there's people our age with, $1 million mortgages. And I just couldn't imagine. It makes me feel nauseous even thinking about our mortgage. There's obviously different job opportunities here than a city, but it also means that we've reevaluated what do we really need in our life. The house that we're about to build, because we bought some land, will only be 145 meters squared. So that's very small compared to a house that people would build from scratch these days. We've only got 1 bathroom. There's only 1 toilet. Kids are sharing bedrooms. Yeah, and people are like, what? That's just unfathomable.
Yeah, we've got a 3-bedroom house and 1 bathroom, and, we make it work.
Yeah, you do.
I recently interviewed an architect about the concept of enoughness, which is an Indigenous concept, like take what you need, leave the rest.
Yeah.
And we went through plans with her company to plan an extension, and we will do that one day. But I said to her, the whole process of planning and designing made us realise that if we do borrow more money to do an extension on the home, our day-to-day life is significantly different because of that. increase to our mortgage repayments every week? And do we want to sacrifice that right now? And the fact is we don't. And, you know, I think perhaps for a lot of people, having one bathroom for a family of 6 is actually really triggering, but it's fine. Like it's, guys, it's all right.
I always recommend the Jane Hillard episode with Future Steady.
Oh, that's who I interviewed, Jane.
Yeah, I'd love to interview her. She's amazing.
She is amazing.
Philosophy.
Yeah, and it is a philosophy we should kind of, I think, all adopt, I should say.
Yeah.
And again, it is going against the grain though, and that's not always easy. And I think it applies to so many things. It applies to aging, like, you know, it applies to what our bodies look like. It applies to what we're eating, how many activities our kids are doing after school, how many clothes we buy each season, like all these things. But I just feel, I don't know about you, but I feel that over the past year, there are more people connecting their everyday choices to the climate crisis.
Yes.
And our everyday choices matter. Like big business matters significantly as well. But I just, at the moment, I feel like I really can't justify spending money on anything that really isn't essential. And I'm okay with that. And I say that as someone that is in a comfortable financial situation in that we do have a small mortgage. We can afford to pay it every week, but we're not spending money on really much else other than bills and food, to be honest with you. And still we're comfortable. Like we've got a roof over our heads. We're eating really good food. We can pay for medical, for the doctor or whatever.
Yeah. And what a privilege, you know.
Yeah, such a privilege. And I think even if we're having this conversation, we're doing it from a place of privilege.
Totally.
But I also think that there is significant shift, and I'm seeing it in the closure of so many small businesses, which is heartbreaking. Yeah. And I'm seeing it in the publishing industry. And it's, you know, it's in every facet of my life, I'm seeing how the cost of living is playing out. And I think there are more people turning, you know, to pre-loved clothes as opposed to buying new, and to, you know, to cooking in bulk instead of like, you know, takeaways and stuff like that. So these little choices do matter. And I think it's those little choices that you can really feel good about them, and they can be incredibly rewarding.
Oh, I love it. Stuff. I love everything about it. I loved your book so much, and I was so happy when you said yes to come on the podcast and chat, because I think a lot of people resonate when you're trying to start making those conscious choices about your life and designing your life, that these things come up. So, but we're coming up on nearly an hour now of talking, so I better let you go. And my children probably need to be picked up from school soon.
Yeah, so, well, my partner's just left to get mine. So
thank you so much for your time today. And
thanks,
we'll put
Alysse.
all your links to your Substack and your book and your social media so people can connect with you and learn more about what you do.
Thank you so much.
You're most welcome, and hopefully we will talk to you soon.
Yeah, I'd love to come on again.
Excellent. Bye.